Thank you so much. So a couple of years ago, my husband, Emery, and I, we moved into our current house. Our address was new, but our place in the community, our presence in the community was not. We have lived in McHenry for decades. I remember chuckling a little bit when we received the "Welcome to McHenry" packet at our new address. Do you all remember the welcome wagon? Well, as stated on their website, I'm going to give you a little history about the welcome wagon. It was founded in Memphis, Tennessee in 1928. And it's based on a much older practice where when settlers were moving west, there would be Conestoga wagons at various locations where people could stop and get whatever they needed for their journey. Well, it was out of that spirit that the welcome wagon was born. And in the early days, there would be a neighborhood hostess who would meet with a new family and tell them about their community. And while they were sitting having maybe coffee and tea cakes, the hostess would give the new families coupons from the local businesses as a way to bring them into the community, to welcome them into the community. Well, this practice stopped in 1998. And my first thought was that it stopped out of a fear of safety. That, it wasn't necessarily a good idea to just knock on anybody's door and go in. But that's not why it stopped. It stopped because by then, by 1998, most families consisted of double-income adults who worked during the day. Interestingly, the welcome wagon was one of the first all-female companies in the United States. And it touched the lives of over 100 million households, including presidents who moved into the White House. Though no longer going door to door, it's warming to know that there's still some iteration of this practice of welcoming new members into the community. Even as, in our case, we'd been members of the community for decades, it was still nice to feel welcomed. Well, as I think about those early days in Memphis, I can't help but wonder just who was welcomed. Or more to the point, who didn't receive a personal call from the welcome wagon hostess? Were people who lived outside the mainstream culture of 1928 offered coffee, tea cakes, and coupons? Many black and brown moms wouldn't have been able to receive a visit anyway because they had to work outside the home long before 1998. Was there the opportunity for a black woman to be a welcome wagon hostess for her new neighbors? I mean, after all, in most neighborhoods in 1928, it was a pretty safe bet that people living next door to each other had the same skin tones. Did white hostesses go into black neighborhoods? I ask these questions without knowing the answers because the online research about welcome wagon is somewhat limited. But given that the civil rights movement came 40 years later, and it struggled to gain acceptance in 1968, I'm going to posit that the welcome wagon was, like most of America in 1928, for whites only. It's usually easier to look back on history and see it more clearly. The rearview mirror is smaller than the windshield, after all. And it's easy to say, well, That wasn't me. That was my ancestors. Shame on them. You know, one comment travelers from other countries often make about Americans, as Emmy told you, I've done some traveling this year, most recently spent 12 days in Greece. And it's fun to talk to people from other countries about their perception of America and Americans. And one comment that I hear a lot is how friendly we are, especially those of us from the Midwest. That's nice to hear. I don't know about you, but I certainly try to be friendly. I try to greet people on the street, in the store, on the bike path. You know, hi, hello, how are you today? It's not hard to say hello, but welcome is more than hello. The purpose of welcome is to introduce someone to a new place or a new situation and make them feel at ease. Welcome offers acceptance. Hello is more superficial. Hello serves as a baseline recognition that someone exists. Welcome says someone is worthy. And as I was thinking about today's message, I realized that every Sunday in my home church, I do an opening. And every Sunday, I conclude my remarks with the phrase, welcome to worship. We in our church talk a lot about being a welcoming congregation. It's important for us to be a welcoming congregation. And on the back of our bulletin, we have these words. We are a fully welcoming congregation. As a church, we support, affirm, and embrace people from all walks of life, family configurations, religious backgrounds, racial and cultural identities, ages, economic status, marital status, differing abilities, sexual orientations, and gender identities. And every week, this congregation states your mission. We did it a few minutes ago. To nurture a community that welcomes diversity, supports the spiritual growth of its members, and acts to create a more just society. Now, it would be easy to look at both of these statements and say they are inspirational. But for many who attend churches, whether yours, mine, or any church in the nation, these words might best be described as aspirational. And that's great. At least churches are setting a bar for who they aspire to be. Individuals have a goal for who they want to step into being. But statements like these, statements that identify who is welcome, beg the question, who is not welcome? Are we just as guilty as the 1928 Welcome Wagon organization of putting up barriers that exclude some people? How many of you grew up going to church regularly? Do you remember taking a bath on Saturday night so you'd be nice and clean for church on Sunday morning? Did you have church clothes? Did you file into your usual spot in the pew and sit between your father and mother, positioned closely enough to one of them that they could remind you with a look or a flick to sit still and be quiet? Did you ever think to look around and see that most of the families around us looked exactly the same as we did? Did it ever occur to us that there were many people who didn't feel welcomed because not all families could afford church clothes? Or not every family had a father, and a mother, or not every family spoke English. We grew up attending places of worship where only some were welcome, though we maybe never even took time to think about that. And if we did, we certainly didn't state it out loud. Then and now, we put up barriers that keep some people from forming relationships with others and relationships with a higher power. Lately, I've been paying attention to the vocabulary we use in church. Church vernacular, technical words. They create barriers too. Words such as narthex, chalice, nave, chancel, apse, offering, ecumenical, sacrament, sanctuary. Church really is a foreign language. And some people didn't grow up learning it. Yes, church terminology can be a barrier. And another barrier to welcoming is ritual. Maybe you're like me. When you're a visitor in another church, you feel pretty comfortable. But despite my own familiarity with doing church, there are those churches whose traditions are so steeped in ritual that I didn't grow up learning, and I feel like an outsider. In those moments, when people are standing up and kneeling and touching their face in ways that make no sense to me, I empathize with how someone else might feel walking into my home church for the first time. Social issues and attitudes put barriers between us, right? Whether in church or just in our lives. Skin color, sexual preference, language spoken, income level, political affiliation, gender, hypocrisy, stereotyping, jealousy, self-righteousness. So a question that you might ask yourselves as member of Tree of Life Universalist Unitarian Church is this: do we make trouble for those who are looking for a relationship with a faith-based community by putting obstacles in their way? And if so, what are the obstacles? And what steps need to be taken to tear down the barriers? If Tree of Life does not put up barriers, what can we do to further support one another? And what is or could be done to welcome the searcher who crosses the threshold of your door for the first time? Well, one way to make a difference in the world is to reach out to a person, one person at a time, to incorporate the starfish philosophy. I'm sure many of you know the story about the boy walking along the beach at dawn, and there are hundreds of starfish washed up on the sand from the high tide from the night before. As the story begins, we find the boy picking up the starfish and throwing them one at a time back into the ocean. In short time, an older man approaches the boy and says, "Son, why are you wasting your time throwing that starfish back into the sea? Can't you see that there are thousands of fish washed up on this beach? The task is too daunting. You can't possibly make a difference." And upon hearing that, the boy reaches down, picks up another starfish, and throws it into the sea. And he looks at the man and says, "It will make a difference to this one." Invite people. Invite people to church. Share your enthusiasm for this wonderful and love-filled place you call home. Invite them, one person at a time. You know, the concept of the welcome wagon is and was solid. Help your new neighbors feel accepted in their community. But somewhere in the execution of this model designed to illustrate loving thy neighbor, the wagon became broken. Hello is not the same as welcome. And if any faith community is going to survive, it's important that we understand the difference. As people of faith, it is our calling to show the world that love wins. As people of faith, it is our responsibility to model a strength that isn't measured by a power over mentality. If the church is going to continue to survive, it is our responsibility to tear down the barriers that separate us from each other and from God, so that now and in the future, our places of worship are truly welcoming to all. Amen.